you're given, that's how we live it. Don't be mad at the system, it's simply how we've existed. I hear a lot of people talking like they politicians and choose to be an accountant because it's safe in a business. Not because they want to do it, just because they heard it pays. And who the fuck wants to be poor knowing that's how we've been raised? Society is getting heavy, I can feel the weight. The pressure of success is like 100 million pounds of shit.
How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Today we're going to have a great discussion. We're going to be talking about how to deal with harassment at the workplace. Now we're talking about equal employment violations. We're going to talk about some of the protected categories that may be of concern. And it's not just about what you should do if you're being harassed at the workplace or if there's a violation of that protected category, but rather even if you're a supervisor, what needs to be done to protect that employee that's making the complaint. What I mean by that is to protect the integrity of the complaint, and basically also to protect yourself, because if you get too involved, then you wind up getting yourself in trouble as if you're the one that actually is on the other end of that complaint. So it's just going to be a very good dialogue. And of course, we have author of The Cage Was Her Cocoon, Connie Alleyne. Connie, how are you?
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me. As usual, I enjoy being here, having these great discussions. And of course, we want to talk about harassment in the workplace, So I am Connie Alleyne. I am the founder and president of the Civilian Corrections Academy. I'm also the podcast host of The Fly Behind the Wall. And now I am a published author as of October 30th of The Cage Was Her Cocoon. So it's all an exciting time. And I thank you guys in advance for your support.
Yes, obviously we are a big, important part of Tier Talk right now. So if the community is supporting you, obviously I would like to thank them as well. It's a great accomplishment, a great milestone. My book is actually just an update on my book. It's going through the line edits, and we'll be doing the design for the cover. So we're almost there, Connie. I'm almost there Absolutely. As well. And then we'll do a package deal. Regular books will be, let's say, about $20. Autographed by me, it will lose value. So we'll make it cheaper. Yeah, this is going to be a very interesting discussion. Unfortunately, not everything in corrections is, rainbows and sunshine. Sometimes we are going to deal with these concerns. And I think it's a time that we actually give people the best advice we can. And again, it's not just for the person making the complaint, but just for the supervisor, because I think there's a lot of things that they may not be aware of. Especially as a supervisor, the actions that you need to take. But the key is why you need to take those actions. And that's what we're going to discuss here. All right, guys, now if you haven't, the show Tier Talks for you, brave men and women that work in corrections. So please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. The bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. We're going to go to our sponsor. When we come back, let's talk about harassment at the workplace. Stand by.
I wanted to attend a university that had an intelligence program. I wanted to look at problems different. I wanted to increase my critical thinking abilities. AMU offered those avenues to expand. Obtaining your degree as an adult, you're actually paying yourself and investing in yourself. You can't put a dollar on it. It's priceless. It's something that can never be taken away from you.
American Military University. Learn from the leader.
Guys, inmate manipulation is a course that is highly needed. It's the process that's so slow moving and subtle that you don't realize it's happening. When inmates choose to manipulate, they manipulate our need to react. Situational awareness and insight is going to save your career. It's going to save you from doing foolish things. Listen to your gut. So the more insight we have, the more we can recognize what isn't so overt, and we can correct our behavior before we fall into a trap that we can't get out of. If you allow an inmate to pull you out of your prescribed role, you are opening up a door for a host of problems.
Inmate manipulation, the psychology behind inmate manipulation. Available now. Link in description. Now, guys, we're talking about violations to what could be considered a protective category. We're not talking about ethic concerns at this time. Ethic concerns could be things that, like nepotism at the workplace, if that could be seen as one, because sometimes that can go either way. Bribes, stuff like that is more of, it creates a bias in how you perform your function. The equal employment side of things is more of a bias on how you treat somebody else. if that makes any sense, and how you don't want to violate what their rights are. Now, I got a list of some of the protected categories. Each state may be different. Don't quote me on that, but it could be. But some of the protective categories that we have: sexual orientation, age, ancestry, atypical, hereditary, cellular or blood trait, color, creed, disability, domestic partnership status, familial status, gender identity or expression, genetic information, which includes refusal to submit or provide results of a genetic test, liability for military service, marital civil union status, national origin or nationality, pregnancy, race, religion, retaliation for having filed or participated in a previous discrimination complaint, sex, gender, or sexual harassment. Hey guys, real quick, the retaliation for EED means that there was a complaint already done, and therefore now you're being retaliated against because you have made that complaint. Hey, real quick, before we discuss things, hey, Connie, I gave you this list earlier today. Anything on this list that surprises you?
No, I mean, it all seems, I think one thing on that list that I was surprised about was military. I didn't realize that if someone might be excluded from consideration because of the possibility of deployment. So military was the one thing I think on that list that kind of threw me for a second. I wouldn't imagine that they would be in any way excluded.
Well, I think sometimes too, when it comes to the military, 'cause let me just get the exact verbiage here. Let me just see something. Liability for military service. Yeah, I don't know if this relates to, but again, you never know. I think if you have someone that's constantly being called to service, they should be allowed the same opportunities, let's say as a job bid or something like that, just to be given the same opportunities, even though they may have to be committed to something overseas or whatnot. That should not affect their ability to do things here, which could be, again, like, let's say I want this job. Well, you're not able to take this bid for this 5-day-a-week post because you're constantly overseas in the military. That could be considered discrimination. Again, a lot of people may not realize that. So that was a good thing that you picked up. And I'm pretty sure that's what the meaning of that is. But guys, please, if you can, comment if you're familiar with that, or curious to see if your state actually or your agency actually sees that as a protected category. I believe we named 23 that was on that protected category. Okay, so real quick, Connie, how would you explain harassment or a violation of one of these protected categories, just in general?
So I think in general, I would look at these as, these are all things that make us different. And so if in fact there was some sort of discrimination or harassment because of one of these things that make us different, I think that's the easiest way for me to say that. So for example, if I'm not going to be given equal opportunity because I have a domestic partnership, I think that is an issue, certainly. And I think what we need to be very mindful of is that it's these things that are in, like, there are our own personal biases, I would have to say. And so they creep up when we least expect it. And so it's kind of just being on your P's and Q's and understanding that there are simple things that are like every day that we might be taking for granted that can actually end up, violating someone who is in one of the protected classes. And like, I think it's understanding that protected class means also protected by the law. And I think that's why we have to acknowledge that agencies have a zero tolerance policy, because it is a violation of the law. This isn't just an agency policy.
Now, right, and every facility should have a liaison, and they should be high up. They should be on the administrative level, again, because that's the highest looking down. But doesn't mean that's your last resort, by the way. If you do have complaints, because sometimes you may get complaints about administration, there should be other routes that you can take that will even go outside the agency for it to be investigated. So again, it depends on where your issues are. but you don't always have to go through the agency to solve them. There are outside entities that will be able to handle that and then just bring it back to the agency or force the agency to act. That's the key. Now, I want to mention something before we go into this a little further, is that we have to be honest with these concerns. Not all personal conflicts are a violation of a protective category. And sometimes what happens here is that people may use personality conflicts as a way to try to create a concern that may not be there. And then when they go to a liaison and they go to discuss it, the liaison, they can talk about it, they can give advice. Again, ultimately it's up for this person to decide what they're going to do, but the liaison could give advice, and they may say, well, listen, I know you may think it's a violation, but having said that, it has to be a violation if it touches on this, this, and this. And then what happens is you may get some people to say, okay, and they leave, and then they come back and their story changes a bit. Well, now the person called me a bitch today, which affects me as a woman. And it's like, okay, but I want to make note that as liaison, your original report didn't have any of these things. I'm just going to put note, wherever it goes, it goes. Because sometimes you have to realize something, and the education of people to let them know like why this may not be a complaint could open up the door for them to kind of maneuver and create a complaint. That's actually look to have more validity. And it's sad that happens, but it does. So again, guys, these are not these are not complaints that you want to mess around with, guys, because there could be someone that really does have that complaint, or there could be a time when you really do have that complaint. And again, every matter will be investigated seriously, don't get me wrong, but it really does go by established credibility. Go ahead, Connie.
So I just wanted to add in there is that, there are some people who just don't know what details are important to include. So if in fact something is truly happening and there is some harassment and you went to report it and they tell you, well, here's some things that, we might think would make this ineligible or it might not go anywhere. Sometimes those conversations actually just educate you on what is important to be included. So yes, there might be times where someone may not have called you a bitch, or they did, but you didn't think that was important, or maybe you thought it was inappropriate to add. But as you're documenting, it's important that you document exactly what transpired so that you have a clear record and you don't necessarily have to go back to try to add something to your original report.
Right. And I don't think there's a time restraint on it either. I think if you're going to make a complaint, I think what happens here is that there is no time of, it could be something that's years ago. There's usually no time constraint. And again, when you go to the liaison, and we're going to do a step by step, but I want to make sure I get something else out there too. When you're sent to the liaison's going to offer you a packet. That's what should happen. Then you fill out what those concerns are, make sure they're related to one of those protective categories, which you'll see, and you'll mark which protective categories that you feel were violated during this negative interaction. But again, you can ask the liaison for advice, or you can just submit it. The liaison gives you advice. That's up for you to take it or not. It's not that the liaison's trying to coerce you not to put it in. Again, I can't speak for everybody, but hypothetically, I realize what I'm doing here. But hypothetically, they can give you advice. Let's be more general. You're right. They can give advice, but ultimately it's up to you to decide if you're going to still do it or not. As I was mentioning, sometimes in the effort to give advice, people change their story to better fit what that relationship could be. And then that's where it's unfair, because again, now you're changing your story to fit the needs of a complaint that now you're possibly making up. And the other concern is the reason why sometimes there's not a time restraint is after, let's say me and you have this personal conflict, and then you come right up to get that packet and start filling that packet up. A lot of that's being done at the heat of the moment. A lot of it's really emotional. And then when you wind up looking back, it's like, man, I made a mistake. I've seen it happen. I should never write that because that wasn't the person's intent. I was just pissed off, and I wind up adding stuff to that just shouldn't have been added. Because at the end of the day, guys, these are complaints that have zero tolerance that lead to major consequences. You're talking about from something like a letter of counsel to automatic removal. I mean, there's really no steps there. If someone's up for a promotion, they will not get promoted with an active investigation going on, and it could stay on their record permanently. An EED complaint could stay on their record permanently. So again, these are no matters to joke with. So here's where we'll have the discussion. So instead of like kind of making it a lecture, let's role play. Just to kind of play it out. Well, come on, Connie. That was you. I want you to know something. Guys, you can't see the other end. I said role play. And Connie, like all women do with men, was like, no. I was like, wait a second. This is a scenario for, we're going to get into an EED complaint right now. But guess what, Connie? I'm my own boss. So, yeah, I'll give you advice on what you need to do with the complaint. I know I meant role play. Like I'm going to pretend that you're like, okay, so, well, first off, Connie, do me a favor. Last time we did this, for the sponsor in the school, I would like to start off first with third person liability. Do you mind breaking that down one more time?
Yeah. So, the thing that I mentioned really was that, sometimes something could be happening and maybe the two people that are engaged in the event or incident or whatever, they don't realize, or the interaction, they don't realize that there's something that could be violating a third party. So if I happen to bear witness of something, and it's offensive to me, or I find that under my protective class that it's violating me, I can come forward and actually submit a complaint in that way. It's sort of like if, someone's up for a job and, two people, one belongs to a protected class, the other one doesn't, if in fact I end up not getting that job because of my race or my religion or any of those other protected classes, certainly as a third party, I can come forward with a complaint. So it may not necessarily, it could or could not be directly against me, but it still opens the door for you to come forward.
Right. And I also want to mention something that we touched on the other day is that usually what's expected of the peers is not the same thing that's going to be expected of the supervisor. So let's say me and Connie have this negative interaction and one of my peers as an officer hears it. The officer would be highly recommended or encouraged to report it. But because they're not a supervisor or not overseeing the individual who's making the complaint, they won't be held that much responsible as a supervisor who is mandated to report it. So let's say me and Connie have an argument and I say something foolish or she says something foolish and the sergeant hears everything or our supervisor hears everything. That supervisor has to report it, but also has to tell the two people, hey guys, you guys got to write a report. I'll put it confidential and then we'll send it up over to the liaison for the next move. But I will tell you one thing. Sometimes you have seen supervisors on good intent. Hey guys, stop. You're getting carried away. Make an effort to stop it. And then it turns out, which is good. You can still make the effort to stop it. Don't get me wrong, but you have to report it. You have to report it at that point because I'm going to tell you something right now. If one employee goes up in good intent and stopping, that's great. But that person also said something that violated a protected category and you didn't do anything about it. So great intent to stop it. Don't get me wrong, but you didn't continue the job by having them both sit down and documenting what the issues were, what was said that could have been that violation. And Connie, you could see how sometimes that would make us hesitant and just wanting to get involved at all, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, so one, as supervisor, you got to know the rules, right? Because you've got to know that there's been a violation and that you have a requirement to step in. So I think, our reality as supervisors, we have to make reasonable accommodations or reasonable attempts to ensure a civil work environment, right? And so when you have situations where, incivility could be fueled or it seems as though you're indifferent to something that you should have taken action on, you still have that same level of accountability, whether you knew or you didn't know what the laws were. So when in fact, I think, yes, you can do the good faith effort to say, hey guys, we're going too far. But, the next step for you as manager is to actually go forward and just have them write a report because you don't know who else is watching. I mean, I think so. First, let me back up. The right thing to do as a supervisor is for you to go forward and write the report and have your team or whoever those two were write the reports. But I think in addition to that, doing the right thing, it's also good to just know that you are protecting others, whether or not you know that somebody else could be offended.
Right. And also, I want to say something too. And this concern here, there's an operational side. Two people got in an argument, maybe it could affect the work. So obviously, you yourself could write a report on that, but there's some confidentiality to that as well, in which those reports you'd have to protect the integrity of those reports. So you have two things. You have the operational concern and what could be a violation of equal employment, like some form of discrimination. But again, you can act on the operational side, especially at the end. The end result is it's affecting the workplace. But there are certain parts of that you'll want to have those reports confidential and sent directly to the liaison. I would actually, as a supervisor, also email the liaison and say, hey, this is the thing I saw today. I advise the officers to write a report. The reports have been put in your mailbox or has been sent to your office. But just so you can document that you forwarded that concern, so now you're in a better position. What is that kind of question?
I just wanted to remind you, because you made a statement the other day when we did this about like not deciding to move somebody, right? Like, even though you may want to do the right thing, it's not your job as a supervisor to solve it. And so, you can get yourself in some trouble if you decide you're going to move someone. Like, yes, operationally. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that. Because like, I think operationally, yes, you may have to take some action, but understanding what's appropriate, that's not going to make it seem as though there's some retaliation going on.
Well, see, that's the key. That's the key, because two things is you don't want to look like you're retaliating the person that's making the complaint, and you don't want to look like you're retaliating against the person who has the complaint against them because they haven't been found guilty or not. Now, the only time separation could be mandated or forced is if the workplace has become hostile, maybe there's a threat for safety and well-being, or definitely if there's a physical aspect to it all, where he pushed me or she pushed me, whatever it is, then yes, an effort to protect the employee. But there's also higher consequences behind that as well. But you can't really separate people because they're not getting along. At the end of the day, as management, what you do is, I'm going to force you two to be professional. You have to be professional. You're going to start putting the onus back on them, by the way. So, like, I know you made this complaint. I'm not going to say I don't know, but, I'm not, the EED, the investigation will have to handle that. But in the meantime, it's up to you guys to be professional with each other on both sides. And if not, if that starts affecting your work, then you will be held responsible to that level. And that really deals with, believe it or not, personality conflicts. When you start having personality conflicts at the workplace, that's very tough for management because we really don't know who's right or wrong. They're personality conflicts. We happen to get pulled into these worlds where most of us want to do the right thing and help. Don't do it. Because at the end of the day, when you get pulled into this world, the outcome is these two wind up getting along and you get thrown under the bus for, trying to do the right thing, but it's true. So in the end, what you do is, when there's a personality conflict, just to protect yourself, still forward it to EED liaison, let them figure out, whoever they send it to, let the investigative authorities realize that it's just a personality conflict, that there's no EED component. Once they clear that, then you can bring it back operationally, address the two parties and say, okay, now this is about being professional at the workplace. And then if need be, if there's enough in those reports to admit that there was a concern, you can now lean on those reports because they're not EED. Now they're more operational. I could maybe give a letter of counsel or something. Sometimes what I'll do is if they're represented by the union, I'll bring the union in and let them know, hey, this is real quick. This is what we got. At the end of the day, if the work suffers, they're both going to get themselves in trouble. But that's only when they realize that there is no EED concern that management could get involved. Now, with that said, if there's an EED concern, but it does somehow affect operations, you can handle both. You can, you have to give the EED to the investigator. They'll handle that side, and then we'll handle the operation. Sometimes both can be handled at the same time, but they're going to be handled in separate components. All right. So basically, as long as I can handle the operations part of it without touching on the EED component, that's it. But sometimes I don't have to wait for the investigation to come back to say, hey, you can't touch on anything operational until we've investigated EED. That's not the case. Operations, they may say, hey, you can do this, handle this, but be advised, in your manner to handle this concern, do not violate the integrity of the EED complaint. Not a problem. So you got to handle it a little bit discreetly. Again, just reminding people of the professionalism at the workplace. Now, let's talk about documentation. So, Connie, you're an employee, you have a concern. Someone said something inappropriate to you. What would be your actions to make sure that if this is harassment, now mind you, harassment's repetitive by nature, which means at some point you have to start documenting these interactions, because when you go to and report it, you have to be specific. And I'm talking about specific, not about just what was said to you, but who said it, when they said it, who you reported it to. So let's talk about the importance of documenting what could be a violation of equal employment.
So, I mean, I think we have to understand that these documents are legally binding documents. And so we want to make sure that we provide all the details of what transpired, who was around. I mean, I think, so there are things that can't be disputed. So, for example, if you say that this particular interaction took place, in whichever area, there are cameras in that area, right? So it helps that you provide those kind of details so that in the effort to investigate, they can go and verify a lot of the information that you may have provided. You want to make sure that you're clear and that you're not embellishing, and that in that documentation, you're not allowing the heat of the moment to take over the details, right? Like, I think sometimes people get very passionate. And so you as I've read some of these, you're thinking like, okay, I've got to sift through this to find out what you're really getting at. And you don't want anyone to have to do that. You want to be able to provide clear details so that there's no doubt, there's no question, there's no need for interpretation of what you're trying to say.
Right. And again, the more specifics, the better, because also the reason why you want to document the interactions you're having is if you are reporting to a supervisor, the reason why you want to put that supervisor's name on the report is because they can't defer the responsibility. So like, oh, I'm having a problem. I've told management. Well, now we could defer it to anyone. It's like, no, I told Gangi. So that forces Gangi to go ahead and do the right thing. Now, as a supervisor, the moment you have a complaint and we feel that starts to touch into something that could violate the protective category, that's when we need to nip it and say, hold on, do me a favor, write this down. Write a report, we'll seal it up, and then we'll go ahead and forward it over to the EED liaison. The last thing you want to do is to try to settle it. I'm going to tell you that right now. The last thing you want to do is hear. And by the way, when the employee brings it to you, it's never going to be like, don't accept this. If I tell you something, sir, because now you're a supervisor now, it's not like a peer. I may be able to go to my peer with a level of confidence because it's only highly recommended. They're not forced to say anything. So I may go to my peer and say, hey, Connie called me this today. What do you think I should do? He or she doesn't have to report it. But if I went to my supervisor, there's no offside dialogue here. It's, hey, Connie said this to me today. What do you think I should do? I'm going to tell you what you're going to do. Not what I think you should do. Here's what we're going to do at this point. Because you never know where that person as a supervisor, where that person is going to come up and say, I told you. And at the end of the day is you are forced to do something. You're forced to something just as simple as tell the person to write a report and go see the EED liaison. But having said that, they don't have to go. That's your suggestion to them. But you're going to follow up with an email to the EED liaison to say that I recommended this person to you. Now, I don't think the EED liaison is going to chase after that individual because we know at this point, if they want to come our way, they can. I can't force you. And what I'll do is, hey, you come to my office, not a problem. Here's a packet. If you want to fill it out, give it back to me, whatever you want to do, it's on you. I'm just here to give you a packet and to take note that you made a complaint and that we did what we could to help you do what you got to do to report that complaint. But at the end of the day, that follow-up email, guys, as a supervisor is extremely, extremely important. Trust and believe, because they may not go and they may say later on down the line when they feel that, oh, you know what, I should have made that complaint. You know what? I was never told to do that last time. Really? Well, I have an email that says I did send you on the day of the incident, and I sent it right to the EED liaison. So what do you think about that CYA move there, Connie? You think that's a good idea? Could you see yourself doing that?
So it's absolutely the best idea. I mean, the last thing you want is to leave yourself out there. You know, someone comes to you, it's just being reminded that as a supervisor, you're always on stage. As a supervisor, you are obligated. It's inherent in your title. So sometimes, you know, someone may say like, you know, I just wanted to ask you your opinion. Like when someone reveals something that could have violated someone in a protected class, or, you know, you don't have the wiggle room to give some random advice and then throw your hands up. Like you have an obligation to act. And even in taking those actions, it's just making sure that you acknowledge, because even in just sending the email, the person doesn't have to go, but you acknowledge that there was a violation and that you've advised that person of what their rights are. The person can't say you didn't tell them. I mean, they could always say that, but it happened. I mean, this isn't necessarily something that we all just want to step into. So I don't think someone's just going to make up some random, you know, but in my mind, it's as a supervisor, someone comes to you with anything, you have an obligation to respond. And really your documentation, aside from sending the person and you had that conversation, you're documenting to the EED person, as well as, you know, making sure you, even in my experience, I've actually sent a follow-up email to the employee. I said, actually, speaking with you today was great. I'm glad that you've come forward and informed me of X, Y, Z. And this is what I've done in order to support you. That way you have an acknowledgement from the employee that there was an exchange between us. Here's what I told you to do. And you have your communication to the EED liaison that also supports you did your part.
Right, I like that. Again, my concern was not all my employees have emails, but you're right. If your employees do have, a lot of civilians will have emails. So yes, I think that's a great move. A lot of our custody staff may not have emails, but you're right, 100%. If you do have that, I definitely would go ahead and connect them or somehow to the fact that I forward you over just in case that game tries to be played later on. It's a great protective move. Also, again, just going back to the, well, real quick, just to play this out real quick, just make sure we get this part across. Let's say Connie has a problem. Hey, Gangi, such and such said this. Oh, hold on. Hold up. Here's what we're going to do. The reason why is sometimes, guys, you got to realize something. The interpretation of what could be a violation of a protective category could hold a lot of weight, too. It may not be something so surface as a racist remark or whatnot. It could be something on how it could be perceived. Something that said, like, again, not to go crazy, but two men can get into an argument and call each other bitches, and maybe that may not be seen as an ED concern. But you may have a man, same type of argument with a woman, call her a bitch, and now that could be an ED concern. Again, it really is two things. Obviously, there's some surface perspective, obviously, the obvious stuff. But then there's stuff that really is based on interpretation or how that person could have perceived that. And at that point there, that's why it's safe for us to always cover our asses and forward it up to the person who gets paid to make those decisions. What's your thought about that, though, on the perception?
No, the perception is everything, because I had an experience where, you know, we were having like a holiday party, and a white person said something about, we better make sure we have fried chicken, right? And initially I didn't think nothing about it, because I was like, yo, I want some fried chicken. Like, what's the big deal? But someone else who heard the statement took it as an offense and came forward with a complaint that, you know, there was, you know, racial undertones or overtones in the statement, and they made their complaint. And I feel like, you know, the perception for me was like, yeah, hopefully we do got some fried chicken. And the perception of that other person was that this was a racial thing that was being brought forward. And I feel like, yes, there's a certain level of sensitivity that we have to have, just because here are the different ways that people are going to perceive our actions. They're going to perceive the things we say. And it happened to be that those two people actually had personality issues, conflicts going on. And so, you know, they took it in an offensive way. Whereas I was like, all right, well, you want me to bring the chicken? Like, what you want? But I think it's that kind of stuff that we have to be very careful and mindful of, because it can escalate into more.
Right. And I want to touch on something that you're saying perfectly well, too, is because especially, you know what? Words are words unless they're used to degrade or dehumanize. And so they're words now that have been connected to that, So again, just in what you brought up just now. So let's just continue the dialogue with that example. So please, guys, when you're watching it, don't take it the wrong way. But maybe there have been times where people have used that to demean another protective category, let's just say like a race or ethnicity, whatever it is. So at that point there, that maybe it wasn't the person's intent, but it's still enough to kind of, let me put a light of concern on this until we can figure out what the intent was behind that. And that's where the subjective part comes in, guys. This is why you have to be very careful what you say, because sometimes even in the intent of, I don't mean to say anything wrong, but having said that, how I could perceive it based on the history of how that word or terminology was employed outside of how you ever used it. You know what I mean? Like you mentioned fried chicken, right? So fried chicken could literally be, I'm going to a barbecue and have fried chicken. It doesn't mean nothing. But having said that, someone could say, well, I'm tired because people always say this is what we blah, blah, so I'm going to report it. And that could be enough for an initial look. Doesn't mean it's going to hold weight, but it does mean enough that says, let me look at that, because there could be reason to believe that there are times when this word connected to that could have a negative tone to it. So again, the subjective interpretation is so important, but it's also ambiguous. It's very ambiguous. So with that said, it's always good to forward that level up. Let them decide what that context is. Let them figure that out. That's what the investigative authorities are for. And then they can make that determination if the word was used or the terminology was used to demean or degrade, or if it just was, hey, he's having fried chicken. I don't see nothing wrong with that. And again, please, I always got to cover myself, but it was an effort to create an example. And I thought that was a great example that was brought up by you and also complimented by myself. And it's good that you brought the example first, because then people will attack me. And, I just don't.
I think that's the thing we have to understand, is that there's a certain level of sensitivity we have to have in general. And so when there's things like that, we want to make sure that we are paying close attention and we're being mindful. And it may not be our intention, but if someone gets offended, they're offended.
So that's the subjective part of it all. And that's where you pass it up. The investigation will make that determination based on the context. I mean, that really is the key there. Now, again, just moving forward to make sure that I believe we pretty much touched up on a lot, but the key here is because it's zero tolerance, you really have to be very mindful of your role as a supervisor, and also, you making the complaint, because at the end of the day is the agency has a right, or has a need, to protect the employee that's making that complaint. But with that said, because it's zero tolerance, if you stray any way from the left or right, away from the path that needs to be taken, you yourself, even an effort to help, could be held responsible. I don't know, Connie, you think we have anything left to say on this, or you think we could move forward and see what goes on with the comments and see what else we have to explore?
I mean, I think we could see what goes on in the comments. I tried to give an example that was one that, maybe people could relate to, and see how simple it can be to offend, right? So, I don't know, maybe we could wait and see where the comments go. And if there's anything of concern that we need to address, we can address it, later.
Yeah. So guys, again, just to protect yourself, supervisor, you got to report. Even as a peer, you should, but you can't be forced to, I think, for the most cases. Again, sometimes it's not surface what the complaint is. Sometimes it's rather ambiguous. Always forward it up. Cover yourself. CYA. If you're forwarding somebody as a supervisor, follow up with an email. Just something that shows, a track record of what you did with your actions. But again, I think it's a very good dialogue. It's something that will protect you in the long run. I don't think these matters are to joke with. I think a lot of the EED complaints are really just the heat of the moment. I think a lot of supervisors may see EED complaints after they write up an employee, because the employee may do that as a way they feel to protect themselves, which technically could be retaliatory in nature. If you think about the employee doing that, the supervisor has a job to do, and now you're getting written up, and now you're going to go ahead and make a complaint, which at that time be like, okay, well, why? And again, with your credibility, why are you making this complaint now? Why weren't you making this before? Why are you waiting until you get written up? Inmates kind of do that. You know, they get written up and, oh, this officer's been harassing me for months. Yeah, but you never said anything. We don't have any documents that you said anything. So it looks to be that you're reacting to the write-up, and that could really question your credibility if that's the kind of complaint you're going to make. And there is one more area we want to talk on, which is retaliation. The agency has to protect the people that make the complaint. And at all times, you have to be professional. You know, let the complaint take its course. But when you retaliate against somebody after making a complaint, even if the complaint was unsubstantiated or unfounded, that person still needs to be protected. Sometimes an unfounded complaint, which is a complaint that is not true, that person will get in trouble for it, but doesn't mean they're going to get terminated for it. But anytime there's a complaint that gets to that office, whether it's unsubstantiated, unfounded, or definitely substantiated, if that person can prove that after making that complaint, they've been treated differently or been treated in a biased fashion, they're going to have a very, 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 very big lawsuit, a bigger lawsuit than the original that could have came to play. Retaliation, guys, 0 tolerance. And before we go to close, anything about retaliation? You're muted.
Oh, when it comes to retaliation, for me, it's one of those things where, you know, we definitely have to be vigilant. And when we see it creeping up, even if it's just because, you know, that whole group mentality where, you know, people start kind of ganging up, because the retaliation can come in different forms. And sometimes it may not just be the two people involved. It could be the people who support those two people, who then try to make, you know, life in the facility very difficult for either of the two. And so, you know, I think if you feel that there is some level of retaliation, you should be bringing that forward as well, because the agency is not going to just know that these things are happening, although they would want to protect you.
Right. And again, guys, this is where the documentation, all that stuff comes into play. I mean, trust and believe, if you're able to, as a person that has a real complaint, able to document the original concern, the route you took, and then the retaliation afterwards, especially if it's legit, you know. And then, by the way, same thing with the supervisor. You know, person's coming to you. You also need to find some way to document those concerns and be part of the good side of it all, the person doing the right thing. And then you yourself will also be protected, because it's not just about the person involved in the complaint, you know, that made the complaint. I'm sorry. It's about the people that are involved in it at any level. So having said that, it could be a witness or it could be a supervisor who reported it. You know, you're all protected. You know, so the person that made the complaint, anybody involved in that complaint, it should be protected from retaliation. Connie, anything you'd like to say in closing, author of When the Cage Was Her Cocoon?
I just want to say, listen, be careful out there, right? You know, things are going to happen, but if you maintain your professionalism at all times, it's very difficult for you to get jammed up, right? You know, people are going to say slick stuff. People may get under your skin. At the end of the day, you're responsible for you and your behavior and your actions and your responses. You have no control over what anyone else is doing. So someone says something or does something that offends you or violates you, you know, you do your part, you do your due diligence, you write what you need to write, you speak to who you need to speak to, but you maintain your professionalism, because you then do not give the other party any fuel to kind of use against you.
I think the key here, Connie, is like you said, we need to be professional with each other anyway. So at the end of the day, whether you're a supervisor, whether you're a peer, you know, don't get yourself caught up in these games. Again, you have the third person liability too. You know, me and Connie are saying some jokes. We think they're funny. And this person may not. And they could report it even though the conversation wasn't directed at them. And I will say, guys, if it could even lead back to the workplace. I mean, you could be at a party that could be a work function. It's like, oh, but it happened outside. Yeah, but the invites were done through the job, maybe through an email at work. Whatever it is, if there's a connection back to that workplace. And you know what? Here's another thing, guys. Even if it could affect the workplace, you know, let's say me and Connie get into an argument and all of a sudden we go back to the workplace and we're just not working well. You know, whatever happened there could easily affect the workplace at whatever this outside event was. And next thing you know, there was maybe a supervisor at that party. Guys, that's why supervisors tend not to want to go out a lot. because they tend to not realize that they can get pulled into a lot of shit, especially if it's a workplace function, or it could be considered an extension of the workplace. So be very careful as a supervisor what parties you attend, because if something happens and word gets out this happens, because people have mouths, guys, and they talk, and they find out you were at that party and you knew about it. Again, you knew about it, because sometimes you could be at a party, doesn't mean you're involved with anything, because by the time you come onto the scene, everything's taken care of because you're the supervisor. But sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes we have to be smack dab in the middle, and it becomes very awkward for you to go to the next day and be that person that has to report it, because you may not think, well, I mean, if I report it, yeah, but someone will, and you don't know that. And now the problem is they're going to find out that they'll be good, but you won't be, because something happened, and as a supervisor, you violated because you didn't report it. So just a great dialogue. But as always, guys, the show is here. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. Stay safe.